She took her cousin's airport shift and accidentally took home the wrong CEO with a secret plan. But before we dive into the full story, let me know where you're watching from and what time it is now. Subscribe to the channel and let's get started. The airport thrummed, a hive of hurried steps and muffled voices. Elara Vance wove through the crowd, her sneakers scuffing the polished floor, a crumpled sign in her hand, Mr. Ellis. She'd agreed to this pickup as a favor for her classmate Lila, always juggling too many tasks, her mind half on the urban planning sketches stuffed in her bag. Her dark hair slipped from its loose tie, framing eyes that scanned the arrival's gate with restless energy. A man emerged, lean and silver-flecked, his green eyes catching the fluorescent glow. Adrian Thorne, though she didn't know it, moved with a heron's grace, his tailored coat stark against the chaos. He spotted her sign, hesitated, then approached, a faint smile tugging his lips. "Mr. Ellis, I presume?" she asked, voice bright but frayed. "Close enough," Adrian said, voice low, amused. He could have corrected her, should have, but her earnestness, the way her hands fidgeted with the sign, held him. In her unguarded words, he glimpsed a truth he'd long avoided, a spark worth hiding his name to keep. "Long flight?" she pressed, already steering him toward the exit. "Exhausting," he admitted, falling into step. The lie felt harmless, a door to her unguarded world. Outside, the city thrummed. Bicycles wove through the dusk, signs humming low. Elara's battered hatchback waited, paint chipped, a relic of her student life. "Not much, but it runs," she said, tossing her bag in the back. Adrian slid into the passenger seat, the scent of old coffee and pencil shavings wrapping him. "Where to?" she asked, fingers drumming the wheel. "Your call," he said, testing her. She laughed, sharp and real, and pulled into traffic. "All right, mystery client, you get the scenic route." Her chatter spilled out, plazas that breathe like villages, paths curving like streams, dreams of parks where strangers become kin. Adrian listened, her words stirring a memory. Veridian Ascent, a design he'd bought years ago, its vision haunting him still. "You talk like you've built a city already," he said, half teasing. Elara's smile faltered, her silver leaf pendant catching the dashboard light. "Just sketches," she muttered, eyes on the road. "Ideas don't always land." Her tone shifted, a door closing, but Adrian caught the ache beneath it, like a song half sung. They wove through neon-lit streets, her voice rising again, pointing out a crumbling plaza. "See that? Could be a garden, benches, kids running, not just concrete." Her hands gestured, sketching invisible lines. Adrian's gaze lingered on her, not the plaza. Her passion echoed the portfolio he'd scoured for its anonymous artist. Her words, "plazas that breathe," matched Veridian Ascent's soul. Could she be? No, too young. Yet the thought clung, a shadow in dawn's light. "Ever designed something like that?" he asked, voice low. Elara's fingers tightened on the wheel. "Once," she said, clipped. "Didn't work out." She switched topics, asking about his project. Adrian played along, vague about buildings, watching her eyes spark at his hints of sustainable designs. Her questions were sharp, unguarded, pulling him in. The hotel loomed, its glass facade cutting the sky. Elara parked, turning to him. "Hope I didn't bore you, Mr. Ellis." Her smile was quick, but her gaze held a question, as if sensing his quiet scrutiny. Adrian's hand flexed, a reflex, his scar hidden in the dim light. "Not at all," he said, meaning it. "You're unexpected." She laughed, waving it off, but her cheeks warmed. "Get some rest. Big client tomorrow, right?" She didn't know he was the client, the architect whose name she'd recognize. He stepped out, the night air cool, her car's taillights fading into the city's hum. Adrian stood, rooted, her words replaying. That design, Veridian Ascent, her cadence matched its spirit. He'd bought it anonymously, chasing its creator, only to find dead ends. Now this girl, her sketches, her silences, she knew something, more than her quick words let on. Like a shadow half seen, she held a secret he needed to unravel. Elara's hatchback rattled through the city's morning rhythm, tires hissing on cracked asphalt. Adrian sat beside her, his presence a steady weight, silver hair catching sunlight, green eyes scanning the streets like they held secrets. She'd been stunned when her classmate Lila called, saying Mr. Ellis requested her as his driver again, thrilled to hand off the task while swamped with work. Now here he was, his tailored coat crisp against the car's worn seats. "Same route?" she asked, voice clipped, hiding her curiosity. "Something new," Adrian said, his tone warm but probing. "Show me your city." Elara's fingers twitched on the wheel, her thoughts flickering to the sketches in her bag as she turned toward the old district. The air thrummed, rickshaws rolled by, incense weaving through open stalls. A radio pulsed from a corner shop. She stole a glance at him, his hands resting calmly, no scar visible in the morning light. "All right, mystery man," she said, forcing a grin. "You get the real tour." She pointed out a sagging market, its stalls bright with fruit, a fruit vendor's warm voice calling out, her face familiar in the morning light. That could be a hub, tables, shade, kids playing, not just a mess. Her words tumbled, sharp and eager, but her breath caught. She'd sketched a place like it once, years ago, before Marcus tore it apart. Adrian leaned forward, gaze sharp. "You've got a vision. Ever put it on paper?" Her smile slipped, hands gripping the wheel. "Tried," she said, voice tight. "Didn't stick." She switched gears, literally and not, veering down a narrow street. "What about you? Big project, right? Spill." He chuckled, deflecting. "Just buildings. Sustainable ones." But his eyes lingered on her bag, slumped in the back seat, a corner of sketch paper peeking out. "You carry your work with you?" he said, not a question. Elara's pulse jumped. "Just doodles," she muttered, cursing the heat in her cheeks. They stopped at a crumbling park, its benches splintered, weeds choking the paths. Elara cut the engine, the silence loud. "This," she said, gesturing, "could be alive. Fountains, trees, people talking." Her hands traced shapes in the air, her voice bright but brittle. Adrian stepped out, his movements deliberate, like a heron waiting. "Show me," he said, nodding at her bag. Her stomach twisted. "It's nothing," she snapped, but his steady gaze pulled at her. She grabbed the bag, yanking out a sketchbook, its edges worn. She flipped to a faded drawing, curving paths, open plazas, a park that breathed, Veridian Ascent, though she didn't name it. Her throat burned as she held it up, the lines trembling in her grip. Adrian's breath caught, his fingers brushing the page. "This is..." He stopped, eyes flicking to hers, searching. "Yours?" She nodded, jaw tight, waiting for the dismissal she knew too well. Instead, he traced a path on the sketch, his voice soft. "It's remarkable." Her laugh was sharp, almost a scoff. "Didn't think so at the time." She shoved the book back, turning away, but Adrian's hand grazed her arm, light as a breeze. "Who said it wasn't?" he asked, voice low, like he knew the weight of her silence. Elara froze, the city's rhythm fading. Marcus's voice echoed. Impractical, childish, a waste. She saw his smirk, the way he'd waved off her work, then later wove its bones into his own. "Someone who mattered," she said, barely a whisper, her hands curling into fists. She climbed back into the car, slamming the door. Adrian followed, his silence heavy. "They were wrong," he said finally as she started the engine. Her eyes stung, but she kept them on the road, weaving through traffic. "You don't know," she shot back, voice raw. "You don't know me." "Maybe not," he said, leaning back, his coat rustling. "But I know good work." His words hung, simple but piercing, like a lantern in the dusk. Elara's grip loosened, her breath unsteady. She wanted to argue, to bury the past again, but his certainty cracked something open. They pulled up to his hotel, the glass tower stark against the sky. Elara parked, turning to him, her gaze sharp. "Why do you care?" she asked, voice low, almost a challenge. Adrian's smile was faint, his eyes holding hers. "Because I've seen work like yours before," he said, "and I've been looking for its maker." Her heart lurched, a question forming, but he was already out, the door shutting with a soft click. She watched him walk away, the sketchbook heavy in her lap, its lines whispering a truth she hadn't spoken. Marcus's betrayal, her buried dream, it lingered, unspoken, like a song caught in her throat. Elara's hatchback hummed through the city's twilight breath, tires whispering on rain-slicked pavement. A soft drizzle blurred the glow of shop signs, their colors bleeding into the dusk. Adrian sat beside her, his presence steady, like a stone in a stream. Her classmate Lila, swamped with work, had pleaded for Elara to drive Mr. Ellis again, unaware of the bond it forged. Now his quiet scrutiny, green eyes catching hers in the rear view, set her nerves alight. "Coffee?" he asked, breaking the silence, his voice low, almost a dare. "Sure," Elara said, sharper than she meant. She pulled into a narrow street, parking outside a cramped cafe, its windows fogged with warmth. Inside, the air smelled of roasted beans and damp coats. They slid into a corner booth, her steps soft on the floor, his coat brushing the table's edge. Her pendant glinted under the dim lamp, a silver leaf trembling as she fidgeted. "You're not just a driver," Adrian said, stirring his cup, his scar catching light as his fingers moved. Its faint line more visible in the cafe's warm glow than in daylight. He leaned forward, voice pulling her close. "Those sketches, tell me about them." Elara's breath caught, her hands curling around her mug. "Just old ideas," she said, voice clipped, dodging the weight in his gaze. "Nothing special." "Lie," he said, soft but firm, a smile tugging his lips. "That park, your park, it's alive. Why'd you stop?" Her laugh was brittle, a shield. "Life stops you," she shot back, eyes on the rain-slicked window. But his silence pulled at her, heavy as the city's murmur. Buses hummed past, laughter drifting from shop doors. She sighed, her guard slipping. "I had a mentor," she started, voice low, the words spilling like spilled ink. "Marcus, he believed in me at first. I poured everything into this one design, Veridian Ascent." Her fingers traced the table's grain, sketching invisible paths. "He called it a fantasy, said it'd never work." Her voice cracked, the memory sharp. Marcus's dismissive wave, his smirk as he turned away. Adrian's hand stilled, his cup halfway to his lips. "Veridian Ascent," he repeated, voice barely a whisper. His eyes darkened, a storm brewing behind them. Elara didn't notice, lost in the ache. "I trusted him," she said, her pendant cold against her skin. "Loved him even. Then he took pieces of it, my paths, my plazas, and passed them off as his. I'd shared it with him, my portfolio open, trusting he'd guide me, not claim it. I'd posted it online too, anonymously, hoping for feedback, never expecting it to reach beyond him. I quit, left it all behind." The cafe's clamor faded, the world narrowing to their booth. Adrian's jaw tightened, his fingers brushing the scar on his hand. "You're the one," he said almost to himself, his voice raw. Elara blinked, her brow furrowing. "What?" she asked, leaning forward, her pulse quickening. He met her gaze, his calm facade cracking. "I bought that design," he said, each word deliberate. "Years ago, online, anonymous. I've been searching for its creator ever since." Her breath caught, her mug trembling in her hands. You're not Ellis," she stammered, the pieces snapping together. "You're Adrian Thorne." He nodded, his smile gentle, almost pained. "I should have told you," he said, leaning back. "But you were so real. I needed to know you first." Elara's mind raced, her heart pounding. Adrian Thorne, the architect whose minimalist garden she'd studied, whose work felt like her own dreams in concrete and green, and he'd found her design, cherished it. How did he find her design? The question burned, pulling her to stay, to learn more. "Why didn't you say?" she demanded, voice sharp, her eyes blazing. "You let me ramble, let me—" She trailed off, heat rising in her cheeks. His gaze softened, steady as a lantern's glow. "Because you spoke from here," he said, tapping his chest. "Not from a name or a title. I wanted that truth." Her laugh was half a sob, her hands shoving through her hair. "Truth? I'm a nobody, Adrian. A student with a beat-up car and dead dreams." His hand reached across, not touching, but close enough to warm the air. "You're the artist I've been chasing," he said, voice low, piercing. "And you're more than he ever let you believe." The rain slowed, a soft patter now, the cafe's hum returning. Elara stared at him, her world tilting, like a familiar face seen anew under starlight. Marcus's betrayal had broken her, but Adrian's words, his belief, cracked something else open, a fragile hope she'd buried. She wanted to speak, to ask how he'd found her design, but her throat held the words tight as a knot. "Drive me back?" he asked, standing, his coat rustling. She nodded, wordless, grabbing her keys. The city waited, its lights smudged by rain, but something had shifted between them, delicate and piercing, like a truth laid bare in the dusk. Elara's hatchback growled through the city's dusk, its engine a low hum against calls rising from riverside stalls. Adrian sat beside her, his silhouette sharp against the fading light, silver hair glinting as he watched the skyline shift. She'd agreed to drive him again, his faith in her work, his link to Veridian Ascent, keeping her driving, not just for her classmate Lila, but for answers she needed. Lila, still swamped, hadn't questioned her taking over. Her hands gripped the wheel, her pulse quick as she navigated the crowded streets, her heart a tangle of hope and fear. "Where to today?" she asked, voice tight, masking the churn in her chest. His revelation about Veridian Ascent still stung, a wound reopened, but his belief in her sparked something restless. "Somewhere quiet," Adrian said, his tone soft but deliberate, like a brushstroke. "I want to show you something." She glanced at him, his hands resting calmly, no scar catching the light. "More mysteries," she teased, but her smile was thin, her eyes sharp. He chuckled, low and warm. "Just trust me." The words landed heavy, stirring the air between them. She nodded, turning toward the city's edge where glass towers gave way to older, greener streets. They arrived at a low-rise building, its rooftop a hidden oasis. Adrian's work, a minimalist garden of bamboo and stone paths, lit by soft lanterns. Elara parked, her steps light on the stairwell as she followed him up. The city's rhythm faded, replaced by the whisper of leaves in the evening breeze. "This is she asked, voice hushed, her gaze tracing the garden's curves, so like her own sketches, each curve echoing her dreams of cities where every corner held community. "One of mine," Adrian said, stepping onto the gravel path, his movements fluid, a heron in its element. "Thought you'd get it." He gestured to a bench under a bamboo canopy, its lines simple yet alive. Elara's eyes widened, her fingers itching for her sketchbook. It's what I see in my head," she said, almost to herself, her eyes wide with recognition. "Show me," he said, echoing their last talk, his calm gaze steady. She hesitated, then pulled her sketchbook from her bag, flipping to a new page. Her pencil flew, sketching a plaza inspired by his garden. Open, green, human. Adrian watched, leaning close, his coat whispering in the wind. "You see spaces like I do," he said, voice low. "Places that breathe." Her cheeks warmed, but she kept sketching, her lines bold. "Didn't think anyone else did," she said, voice sharp but softening. "Not after—" She stopped, Marcus's betrayal a shadow. She remembered Marcus's charm, his promises of love that turned to ash. So unlike Adrian's quiet truth. Adrian's hand hovered near hers, not touching, but close. "He was wrong," he said, firm. "I know what it's like to have your work stolen." Elara's pencil paused, her eyes snapping to his. "What?" she asked, voice raw. Adrian's jaw tightened, his hands flexing, no scar to trace. "My brother," he said, the words heavy, like leaves falling on still water. "He took my designs early on, passed them off as his. It's why I work alone now." The air stilled, the bamboos rustle loud in the quiet. Elara's pulse raced, her sketchbook trembling in her lap. "Your brother?" she repeated, her voice a whisper. The weight of it hit her, Adrian's wound, so like hers, tied to betrayal, to family. Yet a question lingered. How much did he know of Marcus's actions, and why say so little? She saw Marcus's smirk in her mind, but now it blurred with this new truth, a thread weaving their pain. "I didn't know," she said, her eyes searching his, finding a flicker of the same ache she carried. Adrian's smile was faint, almost sad. "Didn't expect you to," he said, "but seeing your work, it's like finding something I lost." His words landed soft, bending her heart's path, a gesture of trust that felt like a door opening. She stood pacing to the garden's edge, the city's lights a distant glow. "Why show me this?" she asked, turning, her voice sharp with need. "Why care?" Adrian joined her, his gaze on the horizon. "Because you're the real thing," he said, simple, piercing, "and I want you to keep going." Her throat tightened, her hands clutching the sketchbook. She wanted to argue, to hide, but his garden, its simple dignity, mirrored her dreams. "I don't know if I can," she admitted, voice small. He stepped closer, his presence steady. "You already are," he said, nodding at her sketchbook, its new page alive with her vision. They left the rooftop, the drive back silent, the city's rhythm sharp around them. Elara's hand steadied on the wheel, Adrian's words echoing. His brother, her mentor, their wounds tied them, a deeper thread she hadn't seen, like a memory stirring in the dusk. She dropped him at his hotel, his gaze lingering as he stepped out, a question unanswered in the air. Elara's hatchback roared through the city's morning heartbeat, weaving past clattering rickshaws and cafe laughter spilling onto the streets. Adrian sat beside her, his silver hair catching sunlight, green eyes tracing the chaos outside. Days had passed since the rooftop garden. Lila, still buried in work, hadn't checked in, leaving Elara to this path, her sketchbook now thick with their shared vision. But Marcus's shadow lingered. Not just her mentor, but her lover, whose charm had turned to ash, leaving her heart bruised. Her hands gripped the wheel, pulse quick as she stole glances at him. "Busy day?" she asked, voice sharp, masking the hope in her chest. Adrian's smile was warm, his hands resting calmly, no scar catching light. "A small project," he said, deliberate. "Thought you might help." Her brow arched, curiosity sparking. "Me? I'm no architect," she said, but her tone softened, drawn by his calm gaze. They pulled up to a vacant lot, a patch of cracked earth hemmed by sagging fences. "A pocket park," Adrian said, stepping out, his coat steady in the breeze. "For the neighborhood, I want your eyes on it." Elara's steps were light on the dirt, her bag slung over her shoulder, sketchbook peeking out, its pages now alive with bold lines. The city hummed, buses rolled by, vendors' songs rising in the morning air. But the lot felt like a blank canvas. "Mine?" she asked, voice sharp, testing him. He nodded, gesturing to the space. "You see what's possible?" Her breath caught, Marcus's dismissal echoing. Impractical, childish. But Adrian's words drowned it, firm as a rooted tree. She paced the lot, her hands sketching in the air, envisioning benches, a tree, a curved path. "Here," she said, pointing. "Shade for elders. There, a play space." Her voice rose, bright, alive. Adrian watched, his silence warm, like a candle's warmth. "Draw it," he said, nodding at her bag. She hesitated, then grabbed her sketchbook, pencil flying, lines for paths, circles for trees, open space for people. Her strokes were sure, her eyes daring him to judge. He took the sketch, his fingers brushing hers, his eyes tracing every line, his posture intent. "It's good," he said, simple, piercing. "Better than good." Elara's cheeks warmed, her laugh sharp but real. "You're easy to please," she teased, but her spirit lifted, the weight of Marcus's betrayal lighter, like a wound scabbing over. They spent the morning there, her sketching, him suggesting tweaks, sustainable stone, rainwater paths. They'd started groundwork, stones laid, a promise taking root. Their dialogue flowed, quick and natural, her idealism meeting his quiet craft. "You've done this before," she said, catching his ease with the lot's shape. His smile flickered, a shadow passing. "A few times," he said, Marcus's name unspoken between them. Back in the car, the city's heartbeat quickened. Buses rolled by, vendors' songs echoing through the air. Elara's hands danced on the wheel, her sketchbook open on the dash, its new park alive. "Why me?" she asked, voice low, glancing at him. "You could hire anyone." Adrian leaned back, his coat still. "Because you see what matters," he said, "and I trust you." The words hit hard, her hands tightening on the wheel. Trust. She wanted to ask about Marcus, about the brother who'd scarred him, but fear pricked her. Could he be holding back, like Marcus once did? The thought pricked her, though his trust warmed her still. "You don't know me," she said, half a challenge, her eyes on the road. "I'm learning," he said, voice soft, cutting through the city's din. She parked at his hotel, the glass tower looming. "Keep sketching," he said, stepping out, his gaze lingering. "We'll build it." Her throat tightened, her fingers brushing the sketchbook. "We?" she asked, voice small, hopeful. "We," he said, firm, his smile a gentle promise. She drove off, the city blurring, her heart stirring, rippling outward. At her cramped apartment, she spread her sketches on the table, drawing late into the night, each line a step toward healing. Marcus's shadow lingered, but Adrian's faith, his trust, lit her path, like candles in a village dusk. Yet doubt lingered, a crack in the well. Adrian's tie to Marcus, his quiet reserve, stirred unease. Could there be more he hadn't shared? The thought chilled her, her pencil pausing. She wanted to trust him, to build with him, but the rift lingered, a truth half-spoken. She closed her sketchbook, the park's lines unfinished, her heart caught between hope and fear, like a song half-sung in the dark. Elara's hatchback sputtered through the city's twilight murmur, its engine a soft hum against palms rustling softly, temple bells ringing faint. Adrian sat beside her, his silver hair catching the last rays, his green eyes fixed on the horizon. Her hands gripped the wheel, her pendant catching the bridge's glow, a firm anchor, her pulse quick as she stole glances at him. Days had passed since the pocket park, her sketchbook brimming with their shared vision. But Marcus's shadow lingered, not just her mentor, but her lover whose charm had turned to ash, leaving her heart bruised. She'd agreed to drive him one last time, her soul a knot of trust and doubt. "Somewhere new?" she asked, voice sharp, masking the churn in her chest. Adrian's scar visible as he shifted, his coat steady. "The river," he said, soft but firm, like a brushstroke on canvas. "There's a bridge I like." Her brow arched, curiosity sparking, but his tone held weight, a firm pull she couldn't ignore. She nodded, turning toward the city's edge where concrete softened into reeds and water. The bridge arched over the river, its iron frame draped in moonlight, lanterns casting golden flecks on the current below. Elara parked, her sneakers scuffing as they walked to the center, the city's din fading to a murmur. Water lapping, crickets humming, a flute weaving through the air. She leaned on the railing, her pendant gleaming, the sketchbook in her bag a heavy reminder of their work. Adrian stood close, his presence firm, like a rooted tree. "You've been quiet," she said, voice low, her eyes on the water's ripple. "Something's up." Her words were a challenge, sharp but laced with need. Adrian's gaze flickered, his hand brushing the scar on his palm, a reflex she'd come to know. "You're right," he said, his voice low, raw. "There's something I need to say." Her stomach twisted, her hands tightening on the rail. "Then say it," she snapped, turning to face him, her dark hair catching the breeze. His eyes met hers, green and piercing, holding a storm she hadn't seen before. "Marcus," he said, the name a stone dropped in the quiet. "He's my brother." The world tilted, the river's murmur loud in her ears. Her pulse faltered, her pendant gleaming as she stepped back. "Your brother?" she repeated, voice sharp, cracking. "Marcus Thorne. Who?" She stopped, the memory flooding, his smirk, his dismissal, the way he'd stolen her work, her heart. "You knew? This whole time?" Adrian's jaw tightened, his scar stark in the moonlight. "Not at first," he said, his words deliberate, heavy. "I recognized your design, Veridian Ascent. I didn't know about you, about what he did, until you told me. Your story, your pain, it fit the pieces I'd seen in his work, echoes of your design I'd never traced to you. He never knew I sought its creator, his theft a quiet betrayal of us both. He built his name on your paths, weaving them into projects I'd never suspected until now." His voice softened, but his eyes held hers, unyielding. "I've been searching for you, Elara, the artist behind that work. I didn't expect this." Her laugh was brittle, a shield. "This? You mean me, a nobody, driving you around, spilling my guts?" Her hands shoved through her hair, her eyes blazing. "You let me think you were someone else, Adrian? Why?" The question hung, sharp as a blade, the river's flow a quiet witness. He stepped closer, his coat brushing the rail, his voice low, piercing. "Because you were real," he said. "Your passion, your pain. It wasn't about my name or his. I wanted you, not the story." His words landed soft, cutting through her anger, but her chest heaved, the wound raw. "You should have told me," she said, voice shaking, her gaze dropping to the water. "He broke me, Adrian. Not just my work, my heart. He made me feel small, then took everything." The truth stung, Marcus's betrayal now tangled with Adrian's silence, a knot she couldn't unravel. She turned away, her sneakers scraping, but his hand grazed her arm, light as a breeze. "I know," he said, his voice a whisper, heavy with his own scars. "He broke me too, took my designs, my trust. It's why I hid, why I work alone, until you, your sketches, your fire, pulled me from that solitude, step by quiet step. But you," he paused, his eyes searching hers like he saw her soul. "You made me want to build again, with you." Her throat tightened, tears pricking, but she held his gaze, the moonlight painting his face in soft lines. "Why now?" she asked, voice small, her pendant steady against her skin. "Why tell me here?" He smiled, weary, almost sad. "Because this bridge, it's where I come to think, to face what's true, and you deserve that." The air stilled, the crickets hummed loud, the flute's notes fading. Elara's heart stirred, rippling like the river below. She saw his pain, mirrored in her own, their wounds woven by the same hand. "What do we do?" she asked, voice raw, stepping closer, their shadows merging on the iron. "We build," he said, simple, firm. "The pocket park's done, Elara, a seed for this. Now we build bigger. Your park, our park, and we face him together." His hand hovered near hers, not touching, but close enough to warm the air. I want you in my studio, Elara. Not just for this, but for what's next. His words were a promise, quiet but vast, like a path unfolding. Her laugh was soft, half a sob, her eyes bright with moonlight. You're crazy, she said, but her voice held hope, a crack in her walls. You think I can do this? He nodded, his smile steady, like a lantern in the dusk. I know you can. They stood there, the river flowing, the city's murmur distant but alive. Elara's heart settled, not healed but shared, like hands clasped in quiet. She'd sought validation, a way to reclaim her dream, but found something else, a partner, a home in his belief. Okay, she said, voice steady, her pendant glowing softly. Let's build. They walked back to the car, the bridge behind them, its lanterns glowing. The drive was silent, her hands sure on the wheel, his presence a firm anchor. The city blurred past, its lights smudged, but something had shifted, gentle and profound. What she'd sought wasn't what she found, like a path leading to an unexpected haven. A partnership not just of sketches, but of souls bared under moonlight. Elara's hatchback idled at the city's edge, its engine a soft hum against gongs sang softly. Market scents curling through dawn. Her battered hatchback, once her only escape, now idled behind a new horizon. Elara smiled, thinking of her classmate Lila's harried call that first day, a chance favor that changed everything. Adrian stood beside her, his silver hair glinting in the dawn, green eyes steady on the crowd ahead. Veridian Ascent's unveiling loomed, its paths alive with her vision, his minimalist ethos shaping its sustainable heart. Ready? Adrian asked, his voice warm, a calm vow. Elara nodded, her steps light on the grass, the air sharp with dew. The park buzzed. Kids from the old market darted. The fruit vendor from the old market sang, her voice familiar, dawnlight tracing new benches, shimmering like dreams. Her sketchbook, tucked in her bag, felt light, a promise fulfilled. They walked to the central plaza, where a stage stood, draped in green. Elara's spirit quickened, her eyes scanning for Marcus. Adrian's hand grazed hers, a firm anchor. You've got this, he said, his scar faintly visible, his smile faint but sure. She laughed, quick, nervous. We've got this. The crowd hushed as Adrian took the microphone, his presence firm. Veridian Ascent, he began, voice clear, is more than a park. It's a vision of connection, born from one heart. His eyes met Elara's, piercing, warm. Elara Vance created this. Years ago, her design was dismissed, its pieces stolen. Today, we set that right. Gasps rippled, cameras flashed. Elara's throat tightened, her pendant glowing as she joined him, her voice steady. This is for everyone, she said, gesturing to the paths, the trees. A place to belong. Cheers surged, but her eyes locked on Marcus, his smirk faltering in the front row, his suit stark against the green. Adrian's voice rose, calm but firm. My brother Marcus Thorne claimed parts of this work, he said. No malice, just truth, like a stream finding its course. Artistic integrity matters. Elara's vision deserves its name. Marcus's face paled, his jaw tight. He stepped forward, voice low. You've made your point, Adrian. A flicker of regret in his eyes. He slipped into the crowd, whispers of his tarnished name trailing him, a shadow he'd carry. Elara exhaled, years of pain easing, like a wound cleansed. The ribbon fell, the park opened, kids racing the paths, laughter soaring like bells. She watched, Adrian's hand near, their silence shared. The city's breath, gongs, voices, life, wove with the park's new song. By a quiet bench, dawnlight flickered, the crowd thin. You didn't need to call him out, Elara said, her eyes on the stars. Adrian's smile was soft, his scar gentle. It was for you, he said, for truth. She turned, her pendant warm, his eyes meeting hers, his voice soft. What's next? She asked, hope bright. Her urban planning studies, once stalled, now bloomed with purpose, guided by this park, this partnership. He nodded to her sketches. We build, he said. My studio's yours. No more cramped apartments, sketching in shadows. Our home, open, alive. Maybe. Her laugh was bright, her cheeks flushed. A home, she teased, but her heart saw it. Green curves, shared lines. You're serious, she said, stepping close. Their shadows won. He nodded, his hand clasping hers, his scar brushing her skin, a mark of shared wounds, now their strength, like hands clasped by candlelight. Okay, she said, her voice a breath, tender, shared. The city shimmered, but here their bond was a quiet dawn, a beginning. They walked back, her steps light, his presence a vow, the park alive behind them, its paths winding toward a future unwritten, theirs. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that hope can be found in the most surprising moments, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Heartwarming Love Story. We bring you stories that touch the soul, renew your belief in kindness, and highlight what's truly important in life.